We get this party started, everybody. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming to my presentation this morning. So grateful to each and every one of you. We're going to learn Azure Fundamentals over the next 45 minutes. My name's Tim Werner. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Cloud and Data Center Management, and I'm a full-time author with Pluralsight. And I have 3 learning goals for you over the next 45 minutes. Let's take a look at those. 2 primary goals and 1 secondary. The first primary is I want to make sure you leave the session with more Azure knowledge than you have now, and also more strategic Azure knowledge regarding AZ-900, Azure Fundamentals. Number 2, I want to give you a heads up on test-taking strategy. We'll have lots more to say on that as we go along, but I submit to you that it's just as important to know how to take a computer-based exam as it is to know the actual subject matter. So the third and secondary goal is to help you develop hands-on Azure skills. I say secondary because I understand not every single one of you may be a full-time IT professional. Maybe you work in a para-IT professional role like sales, marketing. That's one of the things that I like the most about Azure Fundamentals. It's targeted at just about anybody whose livelihood touches the public cloud in general and the Microsoft Azure cloud in particular. Okay? So that's what we've got going on. I know that the slide deck is available at the Microsoft Ignite site, and that's going to be important to take with you because I'm going to give you a lot of targeted tips, tricks, and advice. Speaking of which, how many of you are going to test AZ-900 either today or tomorrow? Anybody? Wow, awesome. Well, let's give yourselves a preliminary round of applause. Come on, and those of you... Seriously, you latecomers, you, and I wish you all the best on that experience. Now, this is a certification study model that I've developed over the last 20 years, just having been in the Microsoft certification world for a long time. And I submit that there's 3 interdependent skills, and you need to develop them all equally to be successful. First, there's the content knowledge. There's the subject matter. And part of what we'll do, actually maybe at least half of what we do today, is going to be reviewing what Microsoft Learning calls the objective domain of the exam, the content, what's going to be on it. Now, there's also practical application. That, as I said, is less important for AZ-900 because it's really not a deep technical exam by definition. But how many of you plan to take other Azure role-based certs like administration, development, architecture? Then there's Microsoft 365 and the AI, machine learning stuff, the data engineer. And on those you can expect to have performance-based lab items where your exam will put you into a session of the Azure portal and you're given a punch list of tasks to complete and you're evaluated on what you do. The third piece of the puzzle, as I said, is test-taking strategy. And I've said this before, I'm sure I'll say it again, but I have seen people not pass their exams, not due to lack of content knowledge or even hands-on skills, but they were distracted, blown away, intimidated by the way that Microsoft will evaluate your knowledge. Even on the AZ-900 exam, although there's no performance-based labs, you're going to go beyond multiple choice. Single answer, multiple choice, multiple answer, multiple choice. You'll have a variety of interactive items that involve some mouse work, and I'll have some tips and tricks along those lines as well. First, a little tiny bit on how we came to this point with these role-based certifications. Anybody hold an old Microsoft Certified Professional cert, MCP, MCITP, MCSE, insert your acronym there. And historically, you'd pass your exam and you'd wait for your certificate and frame it and everything's all well and good. Fast forward now to 2018, 2019, 2020, and we see that Microsoft is now moving from a product-based focus to a job role-based focus. So instead of a certificate as such, now we get a badge. And these badges convey 2 really important things for your career, I think. One is the fact that they're verified. You'll be able to share a link to your achievement with whomever needs it, your boss, customers, whoever, and they can click and get verification that you do in fact have that credential. Now, do you think your badge page will show your score? No. So don't worry about that. These exams are pass-fail. In 20-something years, I've never once been asked for my score. But your achievement is what matters. So number one, these role-based certifications give you validated expertise. And number two, they're built for social media and sharing, as I'll show you later. It's eminently easy to share your badge on your website, on your LinkedIn profile, just to share a public URL. I've had to do that a lot over the past couple years. Okay? So that's what we've got going on. This slide sums up the three, actually four, classifications of these role-based certifications. We're here at the entry level, the Azure Fundamentals certification, and notice it says optional. The reason it says optional is that there's no prerequisite here. You can do this exam at any time without any reference to any of the other certifications. The next level is the associate level, and that's where we start to get into the individual job roles, administrator, developer, et cetera, et cetera. Going beyond that, we've got the expert level, and you notice there is a dependency at this point with one exam. The DevOps engineer, you have to have either the administrator or the developer as a prereq. But other than that, they're all freestanding. And then there are a number of so-called specialty exams, again, all aligned to different job roles. Now, I'm here in largest part to answer any questions that you have. Notice that we have 2 microphones in each aisle. So I want to encourage you, if at any point in time you have a question, please approach a mic, and I'd like to insert your questions and answer them in line, okay? Okay, this is the audience profile that Microsoft publishes on their website. And I've just highlighted what I think are the most important points. Number one, in that first paragraph, again, this certification, Azure Fundamentals, isn't even necessarily for just IT professionals. It's for anybody whose job role involves the public cloud. You may have a non-technical background. Welcome. That's great. This is a good skill set to get under your belt. In the middle there, we also have a focus on people who are in IT as a technical professional, and for some reason, you need to have some basics about the Azure cloud. Maybe your business is gradually beginning a migration strategy into Azure. Maybe you have experience with another public cloud platform like Google Cloud Platform or Amazon Web Services, and you need to quickly compare and contrast what's over here versus what's in Azure, you see? So those are the 2 main roles, and we'll go on from there. What's this one saying? This is just simply telling us that in order to earn your Azure Fundamentals badge, it's just a single exam. That's all. Question that I may be anticipating, once you do earn your badge, is there an expiration? Or do you have it forever? Anybody happen to know? It is forever at this point. That's notable because the other Azure exams have a 2-year expiration. You'll find, for instance, if you take AZ-900 to earn your administrator badge, it'll say your achievement date and when it expires. How do we renew a badge that does retire? Well, another exam is what I heard. That sounds reasonable. Microsoft Learning hasn't told us that yet. That's the other side of the story. They haven't gotten that far. But I'm convinced they will. They have time. But Azure Fundamentals looks like an evergreen cert. And one more point about that. Once you earn your first badge, you get a Microsoft Certification ID or MCID that you'll carry with you throughout your career. And you'll also get access to your certification dashboard, in which you can print and share your transcript, what's called your Microsoft Official Transcript. That will list every exam you passed. It won't list exams that you haven't passed, no scores, just your achievement date. And even if, for some reason, Microsoft Learning changes this to a 2-year lifetime and you choose not to renew it, it'll always be on your transcript. So it's not like it's going to disappear. It'll just be in a different category, active versus inactive, I think, is whatever the nomenclature is. Okay? All right, moving onward, exam overview. Let's drill into the content of the exam. What do you need to know? What are the big callouts? I'm pulling this information directly from the exam page. I suggest that let's go to the page together and let me show you. I suggest that you create a mapping spreadsheet so you have all of the content in front of you, and I suggest you go further and map that spreadsheet to a calendar. What do I mean? Well, here we're looking at at least I hope we are. We're still seeing my slides for some reason. Let me try that one more time. Well, let me imagine what we can look at. If you do a Google or Bing search for exam AZ-900, you'll be taken to the page, right, obviously. There'll be a link to schedule your test. And then the most important part of the page is skills measured, where you have what Microsoft Learning calls the objective domain, or OD. And notice that those are broken down into percentages. And here in Azure Fundamentals, it's important. I want to note that second one is quite a bit larger than the other three, what are called functional groups. We don't need the nerdy name necessarily. So that means I would suggest you spend a bit more time making sure you understand the major Azure products. And if you've seen any of those Azure Service infographics, you know there's like, 170 products at least. Which ones are you going to be tested on? Do you have to know them all? The good news is I have targeted advice for you on that regard, and the answer is no, okay? So, regarding the spreadsheet, yeah, that's what I was saying. When you go to the exam page and look at the skills measured, there's going to be a link to see every single bullet point that's going to be on the exam. What I find is helpful is copy that out and put it into, say, an Excel spreadsheet or a Word table where you've got, heading, subheading, subheading, and break down every single skill onto its own row. Because I want to encourage you to make sure you're familiar with every line item on that blueprint, because you'll see that on your exam. You might think, well, my gosh, how many questions are on the exam? There's got to be 100-something of these skills. They'll be on there in one way or another. It's not necessarily you'll have a whole item devoted to each one, but maybe one will include an item in the stem of the question, or maybe an incorrect answer choice might reference it. It'll show up in there somehow. So that's why this is critically important. And the last piece about creating your outline is I suggest you go ahead and register for the exam. I know if you're doing that this week, it's not so relevant, but if you're going to do it, I know you have a voucher that's going to last 6 months, so you have some time. Go ahead and commit to a date. I think you'll find that inspiring as the date starts to get closer. And you can map each of those rows on your tracking spreadsheet leading up to your cert date. Again, these are just practical ideas to help you in your strategy. The first section here, understand cloud concepts. I'm not going to read each bullet point. Instead, I'm going to call out what I think is the most important content in each of these sections. For the first section of the exam, you might think, well, this is more or less vocabulary, isn't it? You have to know the cloud deployment models, public, private, hybrid cloud. This is astonishingly good information if you've historically been fuzzy. I submit that this is stuff that anybody whose work even touches cloud computing should understand. Azure being an example of a public cloud, Azure Stack certainly being an example of a private cloud. And what would be an example of a hybrid cloud, do you think? How about if you have a site-to-site VPN or an express route circuit between your on-premises environment and Azure? That would be an example of a hybrid cloud. How are you going to be tested on this? Is it literally a vocabulary exam? No. The Microsoft Learning people are going to present questions that do cover the vocab terms, so you have to know what they are, but they'll put it in a business context. They're not just going to ask you flat out definition term, definition term. As far as cloud service models, you've probably seen this. Who has seen the pizza as a service? If you do a Google search or a Bing search for pizza as a service, I think that might help you with this. This is the difference between software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. This is a really big theme that I want you to latch onto in your preparation, being really clear on that difference, where you've got on one extreme infrastructure as a service, where you've got virtual machines or VMs running in Azure, and you are responsible for keeping them patched and secure and performant. Microsoft is responsible for giving you the platform on which to run them. Platform as a service, we're moving that slider between Microsoft's responsibility and our responsibility as a customer. App Service is a good example of a platform tool where you're hosting websites. Microsoft is doing much more of the management of the underlying VMs, and you can focus more on your line of business applications, you see? And then the other extreme would be platform as a service. I always think of Office 365 as a good example, where it's essentially a finished application running in the cloud, and you're just interacting with it as an end user. So it's important to understand these models and what's called the cloud responsibility model, that shift in responsibility or that agreement between Microsoft as a cloud service provider and you as a customer. How about this? This is that big section that I mentioned, understanding the core Azure services. And I also mentioned it isn't too difficult to find one of these infographics that's just loaded with different products. To avoid overwhelm, I want to encourage you, again, to think in terms of those service models and think of classifications of products instead of getting in the weeds too deeply. Because this exam is not about being in the weeds. If you take AZ-103, I hope you like weeds because you'll be in them. But AZ-900 is meant to be a global entry-level issue. So on this particular diagram, and notice in the lower left of each slide, I give you an attribution URL so you can find it on your own. I'm not sure this is relatively up to date. It certainly covers the major pieces. Notice we've got at the bottom the infrastructure services where the customer is doing most of the work and Microsoft is giving you the underlying platform. But we've got a huge array of different hosted platform services divided into different categories: identity, data, storage, and so on. So again, I want to remind you to think in terms of patterns, classifications, and groups. You're going to find that the Azure Fundamentals course at Microsoft Learn gives you everything you need to know to your exam. I'm kind of letting the proverbial cat out of the bag by saying that, but that course is really, I dare say, almost all you need to be successful on AZ-900. Out of curiosity, how many of you have studied the Azure Fundamentals Microsoft Learn course? A fair number of you. Well, those of you who haven't, if you have time left to study, we'll have more to say about that as we go on. Very, very important course, especially to get you through this hurdle of having general familiarity with the mainline Azure products and services. There's an objective dealing with knowing the Azure management tools. Important question. Do you have to know Azure PowerShell or the Azure command line interface or the Kusto query language for AZ-900? No, you don't. You don't have to know specifics. You have to know that they exist. You have to maybe give in your mind, a one-sentence definition that Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI are essentially scripting/programming languages that'll help you do your Azure deployments and management at scale. This is showing on the left the Azure portal, the web interface, that has the included Cloud Shell environment embedded in it. And then on the right, we're seeing an example of the Azure app. We've got iOS and Android apps that give you very nice management capability of your Azure subscriptions and resources. Okay? So just understanding the options there. I mean, if you've got 2 VMs to deploy, portal's fine. What if you have 100 VMs to deploy? That's going to be where you want to turn to automation like Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, and fundamentally the JSON or JavaScript object notation templates that underlie every deployment in Azure. No questions so far? I'm kind of surprised. Don't forget about those microphones. Okay, next we have understanding security, privacy, compliance, and trust. This is actually a very heavy area of the exam, even though the percentage wouldn't necessarily have you think that. We've got the dreaded subject of Azure networking. If you're a non-technical person, this can be extraordinarily intimidating. I dare say, if you are a technical person, it still can be extraordinarily difficult because, I mean, there's all the concepts of TCP/IP and Ethernet, and all of the devices, routers, switches, firewalls. There's just that concept in general, and then there's mapping it into Azure. Ooh, that's a heavy lift for sure. Again, I want you to breathe. Stay close to the exam OD. Don't read into the exam blueprint. What's there is what's going to be on the exam. I have 2 associated pro tips along those lines. One is that Microsoft Learning will never do an exam question on a preview feature. Familiar with the concept of public preview? When a product in Azure reaches a certain level of its maturity, it's not ready for general availability yet, but enough along to where the general public, or at least regions, part of the public, can start to kick the tires. That's public preview. So whenever you see a product with preview after it, it's not going to be on the exam. The second tip is that Microsoft Learning does revisit those exam blueprints every 2 months. You'll find if you go to the AZ-900 page, and go, it's either above or below the skills measured list, there's a PDF link there, and you're going to find that every so often, when products go out of public preview and into general availability, if Microsoft Learning deems that product should be in the exam, you'll see that PDF marked up from time to time. You might see a strike through, and there'll be an indication of when you can expect those changes. So I say that because if your plan to pass the exam is longer term over several months, you want to periodically come back and check to make sure that your objective domain hasn't changed. And if it has, make sure to incorporate those changes in your study. All right? So other than that, I mean, this is a pretty gnarly diagram, isn't it, that shows quite a few networking and internetworking components. You're not going to be asked crazy stuff about IP subnetting and web application firewall rules and all that kind of stuff. It's more high-level general, like I said. And use the objective domain blueprint as your guide as far as what they want you to know. And the subject of identity, I've run into situations with students who have come in maybe a bit overconfident, thinking, well, I have lots of experience with on-premises, I can't believe I said on-premise, on-premises Active Directory domain services, assuming that because Microsoft made Active Directory, Azure Active Directory must be the same thing. It's a direct skills transfer. Is that the case? No. They're very, very different indeed. So you need to understand, A, that Azure Active Directory is the Microsoft Cloud Platform Identity Store used not only with Azure, but also Office 365 and Dynamics 365. You have to know about some of the other Azure AD products. The main one that you'll use in your subscriptions and with your cloud applications is just Azure Active Directory. But then there's things like Azure Active Directory Business to Consumer, B2C. How is that different, for instance, from Azure Active Directory Business to Business, B2B, you know? Just being able to give a sentence in your mind or an elevator pitch to differentiate those ought to be enough. And to answer that question quickly, Azure Active Directory B2C is essentially a portable version of Azure Active Directory that's meant to attach to an application you develop, maybe a mobile app that you want to sell for lots and lots of money. And that B2C tenant has plumbing, application plumbing already built into it to help users use their social media identities. Instead of having to create a new identity for your app, who wants to create a separate identity? They can reuse their social media login, and most of the programming is already done in B2C, so there's some value props there. The B2B collaboration is just the ability to invite somebody from outside your organization to come into your Azure AD environment. They can keep their email address, they receive an invitation, they redeem the invitation, and they come in and you can give them access to resources just as if they were a native cloud user. What about governance? This is important. Here it's a question of, first of all, understanding what Azure governance is. Who can do what in your Azure environment? Who is doing what in terms of authorization? Who's responsible for doing what? And what policy do you have in place to ensure that you're within your security, operational, financial constraints? Maybe you have compliance requirements to where you can only deploy Azure resources to certain regions. Maybe you're especially conscious of cost and you want to limit the size of virtual machines that your developers and administrators can deploy. How can you track cost across different groups within your business? that are working across different subscriptions and resource groups and regions. So this brings in a handful of Azure products that, again, you need to have 1 or 2 sentence familiarity with. You don't need to worry about hands-on how to actually do the stuff. That's what we get into with the associate and expert level exams. So specifically, we're talking about Azure Policy, for example. That's the platform that you can use to do all sorts of those things that I just mentioned. Limit regions, limit resource size, taxonomic tags. It would be the answer to the question of how you can organize your Azure resources, for instance, by cost center, and then use tools like the Cloud Management Blade in the Azure portal to report on cost based on tags. So again, just think about some of these possibilities in your mind. Anything else on here that jumps out? I don't think so. Okay. I think this is the last domain here, pricing and support. And this is probably my favorite domain because I find that AZ-900 is useful to just about anybody, like I said. And even if you're already working in Azure, there's something for you, I submit. Maybe you've always been a little bit fuzzy about some of the distinctions between the different support plans that Microsoft offers. Or maybe you've been a little bit fuzzy about the service lifecycle, private preview, public preview. For instance, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here, but does anybody ever use preview features in production? You know, you're in Azure portal, you see a feature there, it has preview after it. Okay. Be careful is the general guidance there. And that's part of this learning bit here. Being aware specifically of a number of Microsoft websites, believe it or not. You need to be absolutely clear on what the pricing calculator is. So this would involve you're just going to azure.com and clicking through to a few sites, got it, and you're good. You're not going to be asked detailed questions about it, but you'll be asked a question, for instance, you need to develop a price quote for a customer who's interested in deploying their website in Azure. What do you do? And the option might be pricing calculator, it might say TCO calculator, it might say trust center and service trust portal. You just simply need to be able to differentiate the purpose of those public websites. And what they are, as I said, pricing calculator allows you to tap into the Azure pricing application programming interfaces and generate price quotes. TCO is total cost of ownership. That's for businesses that are wondering how much money they can save by migrating to Azure. What you do in TCO calculator is specify, it can take hours if you really want to get into it, and outline your current environment, and then you'll get an estimation from Microsoft of how much that'll cost to migrate into Azure. The Trust Center is great for businesses that have to do compliance audits because you can see all of the attestations that Azure itself is qualified against. And there's a ton of documentation in there to help you check the proverbial boxes to pass your audits. Going even further, in what's called the Service Trust Portal, there's a tool called Compliance Manager. And that is something only someone who works full-time with compliance would love, I think. It's pretty intimidating. But it's meant to help your compliance officers actually complete their work. It shows whatever your law or regulation is that you're working with, there's an entry in there that has every line item already populated, and it already lists out in your subscriptions what you're matching and what you're not. It's pretty impressive, actually. So that's a bunch of appropriate on-scope websites that you should be aware of, all accessible from the azure.com portal. This is a picture of the cost and subscription management blade in the Azure portal. Lots of important concepts here about where is your money going. Of course, it's a common fear of anybody, it seems to me, of starting an Azure subscription, deploying something, forgetting about it, and then getting a surprise at the end of the month kind of thing. So it's important that you understand where to go to see where your spend is. You can, in the Azure portal, this is a good spot to go actually, because as you can see, you can generate detailed usage reports on how you're spending over the course of each period. As I said, no preview features, so anything you see in your environment with preview after it, unless it's on the exam objective, ignore it. But notable about this ties back to what we were talking about a bit ago with governance. The fact that this cost management blade allows you to create these pretty pictures using tags. And if you have done anything with Azure deployments, you know that things can get tricky because you normally would put your environments in what are called resource groups. And you think, okay, well, as long as everything in the project is in a single resource group, I can track those costs, I can raise alerts, everything's cool. It's rarely that simple. You're going to find that a single deployment might span multiple resource groups, and that's where taxonomic tags become critically important. And I'll just go one step beyond that. The problem of taxonomic tags where you've got people forgetting to apply tags to their deployments or hand typing them with misspellings so you're not catching stuff in your reports. That again ties back to governance. Azure Policy, as a matter of fact, has a number of built-in policies where you can do tag enforcement. And one of those things is you can determine what the valid tag key value pairs are and then instruct your people to just choose the appropriate one when they deploy. This is a snapshot of the support plans page at azure.com. And this is, I rarely as an instructor encourage students to memorize, but this is the one example where a little bit of memorization, I hate to say it, might help you, because you can expect a couple questions that will require you to differentiate among the support plans. The text is really small on this slide, but as you see, you start with the basic or the free plan, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 paid tiers. And as you work from developer, standard, professional, direct, and premier, you're going to notice that, of course, the price goes up, but the response time goes down. So you may be asked something as granular as you're helping a customer who has a need for less than 1 hour response time from Microsoft. What should you suggest they do with regard to a support plan? And the choices will be just the names, and you again have to think in your mind, okay, support plans, got it. I remember it was professional, direct, or whatever the correct answer you think it is. Okay? And then finally, the Azure Service Lifecycle. This is a good website to bookmark. It's the Azure Updates page. And anybody here a fan of RSS? Would you admit it if you were? Really simple syndication. You can get an RSS feed URL for this page to always be notified when products work through the different levels. You know, there's internal development. Then there's private preview that you can normally, depending, opt into. Then there's public preview where the feature bubbles up in the portal and you might see it with the preview mark on it. And then you wait for the general availability. Quick anecdote, kind of embarrassing. The other day I gave a presentation here on Azure Bastion. And I'm talking and teaching about it being a preview feature and some of the hazards and gotchas about preview. Turns out it had gone GA the previous day. Whoops. But for your purposes, yeah, you need to understand the high-level view of the service lifecycle, private, public preview, and then generally available. What do you think, practically speaking, is the biggest difference between a feature being in public preview versus GA? How does that impact you as a business, really practically? Yeah, it's support, exactly. And there's a page, if you do a search for Microsoft Azure Preview terms, you can look at the actual legalese, and it says that. It says that unless otherwise noted, a public preview feature has no service level agreement or support associated with it, so you need to use it only in a development or testing environment. Of course, the complication is that some engineering teams will do production support when a product is in public preview. Azure Migrate is an example. That's, again, another reason why it's a good idea for you to have one eye on the Azure policies or the Azure Updates page regularly so you can be apprised of that kind of stuff. Okay, as we enter the home stretch here, let's get down in terms of how to prepare. Exam strategy. Just some metadata, first of all. You can expect 40 to 60 questions. It's a shorter exam than the administrator, developer, the associates. It's 60 minutes instead of 2.5 hours, okay? Hopefully that's good news. So hopefully you should be in and out within a reasonable amount of time. Another note I want to mention about this is that you do get partial credit. So if there's an interactive item that has you dragging and dropping stuff and you're thinking, oh boy, is this all or nothing? It's not. You'll get credit for whatever you get correct on an item. Same thing with multiple answer, multiple choice. Choose 3, choose 2. You will get partial, so take comfort in that. Now, if you happen to be running so short on time you're concerned you're not going to be able to get to every item, please guess. Never leave an item unanswered, because of course your chance of being marked off is 100%. If you guess, at least you have a percentage of accidentally getting the correct answer. Next, plan, as I said, for 90 minutes. There's a bumper period before and after the exam. It might be a little less than 90, maybe it's an hour 20, but you get a little bit of time before to take a quick tutorial to familiarize yourself with the interface, and afterwards you have the ability to give feedback to the Microsoft Learning team if you have a question about an item. Actually, to that point, if you feel that there's an item that was unclear, vague, unfair, and you don't happen to leave it as a comment in the exam, you can go back afterwards. The page that you'll want to look up, and it's in the slide deck, so it's called the Microsoft Certification Exam Policies and FAQs page. That's worth your bookmarking, the Microsoft Certification Exam Policies. One of the things they have in there is what to do if you have an issue with the items. Now, a company called Pearson VUE is who delivers the exam, so if you have an issue with the exam engine, that would be an issue you'd file with Pearson VUE. But for the content itself, you can get that contact info from that exam policies and FAQs page. And then, as I said, there's more than multiple choice questions. We'll talk about that more momentarily. The price point of AZ-900 is significantly less than the associate and expert exams. In USD, it's $99, whereas the other ones are $165 as of today. Of course, you're all got 2 vouchers here at Microsoft Ignite, so it's not so relevant. Localization at this point looks like English, Japanese, simplified Chinese, and Korean. The passing score is 700 out of 1,000, but it's not 70%. Microsoft Learning has some algorithm that they've yet to ever publicly disclose of what it actually is. You just want to hit that magic number. As we've talked about at the beginning of today, you don't have to worry about your score. If you get 700 or 1,000, I'm equally happy for you, and you'll have that achievement and you'll have that badge. That exam certifications and FAQ page also has valuable information on retakes. If you don't pass on your first attempt, you can schedule again immediately, but it has to be at least 24 hours in advance. And then there's this additional rules for second attempt, third attempt, and so on and so forth. All right. A bit about delivery. Here at Microsoft Ignite, it's a little bit different. But once you get back home, you have a question for yourself. Are you going to use a Pearson VUE testing center, or are you going to take the exam remotely in your home and office? Has anybody taken a remote exam? Very few. It's gotten a lot better. Let me just quickly bring out all these bullet points. The main difference is the testing center, you're kind of at the mercy of their hardware. And if the testing center doesn't have a widescreen monitor, it can be painful. It's not so much of an issue for AZ-900, but for the associate and expert exams where you have performance-based labs, you don't want to take the exam on the PC that I have in Nashville, Tennessee. In our testing center, the one that I habitually use, the testing center has CRT monitors that are like 9 inches. Really. And the tower PC cases have 3.5-inch floppy drives in them. Rock and roll. Now, with regard to the remote delivery, it's a little bit of overhead. You'll have to test your PC, download a little executable that tests your environment. It used to be you had to have a webcam because you're going to be working with a live proctor. Now I guess you can do it with your phone. You also want to make sure if you're doing remote delivery, you're in a room that you don't mind disrupting a little bit, because for exam security, you can have only one physically attached monitor. You can't do the thing where you're working on a laptop and you're going to another monitor. It has to be a single PC with single monitor. No papers and all that kind of stuff. That's a difference. In a testing center, you get the whiteboard. When you do the test remotely, there's a digital whiteboard that you interact with the keyboard and mouse. You can't have any physical notes in your area. If you have pictures on your desk, they make you put them face down. If you've got multiple monitors. So again, it can be a bit intrusive, but the benefit to the remote delivery is if you're far away from a testing center, it's super convenient. And who wouldn't love to take your exam in your pajamas and slippers, right? All right, this slide is bringing out some basically ads. The main point I want to transmit here for you is to do a personal inventory and think about the courses that you've taken or books that you've read or websites that you've looked at where you benefited the most. In other words, I think it pays for you to study your learning style and then choose learning methods that align to that. This is the most important across the board, in my opinion. Microsoft.com/learn. It's the Azure Fundamentals course. It's fantastic. It really is. It's aligned directly to the exam objectives, and each part of it literally maps to the exam ODs. This is what I meant earlier when I said it's pretty much all you need. And it's free, too. There's literally no charge. You sign in using your Microsoft account, and there's a gamification thing where you can earn experience points if you're into that kind of stuff. I am. And it's really great. Some of the other modules at Microsoft Learn even give you hands-on access into the Azure portal and the Azure command line interface. It's an integrated sandbox, so you can get hands-on skills development without burning up your own Azure subscription or Azure credits. Very important. This is just, I have some other references. I can jump ahead. You can look at those for homework. The National Institute, NIST or NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, has a brief white paper that covers a lot of the vocabulary that's on the exam. The Azure documentation is fantastic. There's free training from the company I work for, Pluralsight. There's a book, I tech edited this book so I can verify that it's really top-notch. It's an exam ref that's written, again, to every single line item on the blueprint, and I've given you short URLs in the slide deck that you can get. Thank you for patiently waiting. Let's hear your question.
One question that I had, if you can hear me.
Get on the mic, if you would. Get right up, get intimate with it.
Sure. No, I was wondering if the voucher that we do have for the exam, do we have to take that before the conference is over? Can we take that within the 6 months when we go home?
Okay.
And then the other part of that is, my understanding that we only got one voucher, we do get two?
Okay. Short answer to that question, it's about the voucher mechanics. You as a Microsoft Ignite attendee. Short answer is go to the Certification Center, which is about midway down the concourse, and they have a poster there that has all the details. That's the official short answer. The longer answer is you do get two vouchers, one to use this week, another to go 6 months in advance. Okay? I've also included some practice exam items in the slide deck for your edification. I want to just jump ahead to my contact info so we can stay in touch. And I think that's just about the mark, everybody. I want to thank you again for being here. Please come up and say hi. Have a great day, everyone.